And this meeting is being recorded. And on this trip were Tracie and myself, Don Pendergrast, Cam Leonard, Wayne Howell, Kim Nay, David Musgrave, and Richard Murphy, and Mike Schmoker and Margaret Mannix played a pivotal part in this. So, why did we want to do the Nigu River? What did I miss?
I might pause. Can y'all see all the people on the side, or just the slideshow? Anybody?
We only see the slideshow. We only see you. Or I see
Excellent.
you.
Okay.
Well, feel free to make us go away. Thank you.
Okay, great. So, good. I'm not looking at this. So, why did we want to float the Nigu and Etivlik and Colvilles? Well, for one, this is there's a bend in the Etivlik River, just upriver from its confluence with the Colville, that is the most remote place in the United States, as measured by some, GIS application. So we wanted to be in a remote place in the Arctic, and this was for my 75th birthday present. So we wanted to take a remote trip in the Arctic. And Don and Tracie, the two of us, along with Richard Murphy, had been on this river in 2015 on a trip with some other close friends, Ron Yarnell and company. And one thing that we noticed was we wanted to spend more time exploring some things that we did not have a chance to explore in 2015. And some of those places were the archaeology spots that we'd seen. We wanted to spend more time. We wanted to learn more about and experience more of the archaeology of the place. And in 2015, this particular trip was like idyllic. It was bright, sunshiny, blue skies and sunshine, lovely clear water, easy paddling. Oh yeah, this will be great. So that's why we chose to do this trip. And in 2015, when we got to the Colville, we were ready to keep paddling, and we were just had run out of time. Let's come back. We'll do this. We'll spend 2 weeks on the Nigu Etivlik and then 2 weeks on the Colville. And won't that be a great trip?
So the Nigu starts and gates the Arctic and flows north and runs into the Etivlik River, and then the Etivlik runs into the Colville. And if you were watching Jack Mosby's presentation, he floated by the confluence of the Etivlik and Nigu on his trip about a month before we took off on our trip. So I did a lot of the logistics for this trip, and they were complicated. And so we had some questions, how were we going to access the river from Coldfoot or from Battles? We're going to be out a month. Would we try to take everything with us or do a resupply? There are a limited number of put-ins. Some use a float plane, and some use our gravel strips or really gravel bars, and the same with takeouts. And where they are really impact your trip. And I was advocating for let's go as high up as we possibly can and start our trip as much as possible in the mountains. And then where were we going to take out? We decided we wanted to go to Umiat, but then would we fly to Coldfoot or Fairbanks? And all of these things were colored by the one big question, which is how many people should come and how many flights will that take, as well as how much weight can we bring? And then, of course, how much will that cost? And that is a question despite the period there, and a big one. And so I think of that as finding the sweet spot people, weight, flights, and cost. And so this is what we ended up coming up with. And as you can see, it's kind of flying to Bettles, flying in with Brooks Range Aviation, a bunch of planes involved, flying out of Umiat with Wrights on a caravan charter. That was new for me. And 9 participants total. And it was going to be flights were going to be about $2,000 a people, we thought. So that's what we ended up planning, flying in with Brooks Range Aviation, a resupply with Coyote Air, and taking out with Wright Air Service.
So the trip was we'd fly to Bettles commercially, and would freight some excess stuff there, and would fly from Bettles into with Brooks Range Aviation into the lower Nigu Lake, which is inside Gates of the Arctic National Park. We would then float to the confluence of the Etivlik and then the confluence of the Colville. And there we would get a resupply, and Cam would fly out on the resupply, and Mike and Margaret would fly in on the resupply. And then we would paddle another 2 weeks to the takeout in Umiat, where Wright's Air in one of their caravans would pick us up and fly us straight back to Fairbanks. Sounded pretty good to us. So that's what we did. And we flew in Brooks Range's single Otter, flown by Garrett, and in we went.
With almost all of our stuff.
Almost all the gear fit in that plane. We had one boat that wouldn't go in. Now, I know you guys have seen plenty of video of airplanes taking off. This is a pretty cool one. Well,
I don't know if it's moving for y'all. It's frozen on our screen.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
frozen.
well, we'll can that. But how many otters are there? Were made?
50. Yeah, it's a rare airplane. So, Cam, you're going to tell us about the joys of our Portage.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, we get dropped off on the edge of that lake where you can see the line, and unloaded everything, and then started to scope out the best route to get over to the river, and started carrying loads of stuff. I think it was the hottest day on the trip, and it was buggy, and the ground, not surprisingly, was uneven. So it was kind of a slog, really. We guessed was about a half a mile, and it was either 5 or 6 loads to get the boats and the gear and ourselves over there. So it was a pretty hard day. And as you can see, we were scoping out, where are we going to put these boats together? Because, we didn't assemble them until we had gotten them to the river. So all those pictures are after we've gotten all the gear over and assembled them. But the best camping site was on the other side of the river. So we ended up bringing the boats to the river, putting them together in the brush, more or less, and then just ferrying ourselves and all the gear across the river to the gravel bar. And that was a pretty solid day to get that done. But we ended up choosing to take the next day. So after we spent that first night and do a layover day at that same site. So we didn't move downriver the first full day. And I'm a big advocate of layover days in general, but when you do these fly-in trips with alley packs, it's really nice to be able to start with a layover day, because many of you have put these together. I mean, they're a little bit tedious, a little bit time consuming to assemble. It really helps to have 2 people working on a boat at the same time. You don't want to be in a hurry and feel like you've got to rush to get your boat together in order to get downriver. So plus having an initial day to get your stuff organized, whether you have an inflatable or an alley pack, is a nice luxury too. So I really like that. And I've done that on some other fly-in trips where you just give yourself that first day in camp to get your act together. And we did take a day hike. There was a rocky bluff above this campsite that you can see had beautiful views. And so that was our first day and our day hike on that day. That was probably the best weather of the trip, was those first few days. Went downhill from there.
So you can see that the weather did change. But we were talking yesterday, actually, or just the other day, and Wayne made this statement that it was gourmet all the way. And I looked back through my journal notes, and we had talked about highlights of the trip, and someone had said bowl licking, that every meal was bowl licking good. And it was great. People did different things, but there were a lot of homemade meals that people then dehydrated and then reconstituted. And Kim and Wayne made tortillas on the trip. That was a first for me. And Wayne won the Golden Ladle Award with his Southwest stew. So the food actually ended up being a highlight on this trip.
Early on in the trip, we met two groups of young men from the YMCA camp Widgiewagon out of Ely, Minnesota. And these guys were young, very young. They were like 16, 17, 18. The leaders were, maybe 20 years old. And there were two groups of them to accommodate the group size limits in Gates of the Arctic National Park. And they were consummate paddlers, and we all were sort of in awe of them, and told them that we felt that they were really lucky, that we wished that when we were 15, 16, 17 years old, that we had opportunities to be in a remote place like this. And they looked at us and went, wow. We think that when we're, in 50 years, when we're as old as you guys, we hope that we can be in these remote places. So there was a lot of mutual admiration going on there. And they were, it was lovely to see these young men being in such a terrific place. All right, Wayne.
Okay, it's my turn. Yeah. So as soon as Kim and I got invited on this trip, I began to compile information. So I first came to Alaska in 1983. I'm an archaeologist by training, and I first came to Alaska in 1983 and spent 5 months in the Brooks Range living in Arctic Village. So I became familiar with the prehistory of the area and really intrigued by it. And so when Don and Tracie invited us to come on this trip, I started to pull information together, and I was aware of some really excellent archaeology that has been done in recent years, not far from the Nigu. In particular, a big site called the Mesa site. It was investigated by the Bureau of Land Management out of Fairbanks. Michael Coons was the lead investigator there. And I also have a friend who is a geomorphologist at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks, who has done a lot of work up there trying to figure out the past environments and the extinction of the megafauna there. And so I compiled all these papers about the Pleistocene history and habitats of the area. And so much of the trip was spent reading those papers, and I compiled a library of about a dozen or so papers and made them available to everybody. And so throughout the course of the trip, we would basically paddle past these Pleistocene landscapes, which you could smell and touch and feel, but in particular smell. And it was a real treat to sit in place and read the papers that talked about how climate had changed in the Arctic during the Pleistocene. Next. And in the course of compiling this library out of the blue, the quarterly journal American Antiquity arrived, and it had on its cover a story about some mysterious blue glass beads that had been discovered at 3 sites in the basically in the area we were going to, 2 of them on the Nigu River. And these blue glass beads were found starting in 1964. A couple of them were found later in 1996 and then in 2004. And when originally found, the archaeologists who found them just looked at them and said, oh, they're historic trade items. And they just kind of left it at that. But when they found them in 2004 during some test excavations, they started looking at them again and said, wait, this is not right. These are really unusual beads. And when they tracked down their origin, they discovered that they were manufactured in Venice, Italy. And when they looked at the radiocarbon dates, dating the items that they were found with, they found that the beads had likely come to Alaska, not as historic trade items, but as pre-contact trade items. And they probably dated from about 1443 until 1488. So they were items that had come from trade across the Silk Road, which is the upper right image there, and probably traded out of Venice along the Silk Road, and then hooked some river routes north through Siberia, across the Bering Strait. And then the map on the left is the trade network in Alaska. At the mouth of the Noatak River was a big trade center called Shashilik, and then people would trade up the Noatak River through a pass, I think it's called Howard Pass, over to the Colville system. And the blue glass beads were found at that cluster of sites right in the center of that image. Could you go back 1 slide, please, Tracy?
Sure.
And so one of the sites that was critical in the discovery of these beads was a site called Punyuk Point. It's on Etivlik Lake. Dave Musgrave and I hiked over to it on the day that we had a layover there. You can see a house pit from that site, from Etivlik Lake. And then if you look at the map of the site, which had a number of house pits, there's a black triangle in the middle of that map that lies between the houses. When the archaeologists in 2004 worked there, they took a metal detector and were looking for signs of metal in that site, and they found that black triangle, they found what looked to have been a necklace that somebody lost. And that was the key piece of the puzzle, because they did a radiocarbon date on a piece of willow bark twine from that necklace, and it dated to the late 1400s. And so this is evidence of pre-contact or pre-Columbian trade with items moving from Venice, Italy, across the Silk Road and into Alaska before Columbus. Really fascinating stuff. Table on the right's the radiocarbon dates. You really can't see it, but that's how they came to that conclusion. Next slide. And I will hand off there. So we've got other archaeological sites coming up, but yeah, the blue glass beads were a real topic of interest for us. And we're able to visit 2 of the sites where the beads had been found. Over.
Well, here Wayne and I on the Nigu, and I just want to let you know that you can never float the same river twice. It was a completely different river from our 2015 trip. And one of the reasons for that, I think the primary reason for that, is there was a major flood early in the summer, and it scoured out the bed of the river, rearranged all the rocks, rearranged all the gravel bars, and ripped off a lot of tundra and deposited that in the river. So it was a much different sort of river than it had been 6 years earlier. So shallow water, lots of riffles. We were in and out of the boats constantly, and made in those early days made very little mileage in a day. I mean, one day I think we were at it all day. We went 5 miles. So we were dodging gravel bars and tundra, and then we passed an enormous slump due to climate change and warming in the Arctic, and that deposited probably hundreds of tons of gravel into the river and a lot of silt. So from this point on, as soon as we passed this, we had very turbid waters. So the navigation was sort of tricky. A lot of tundra to dodge, gravel bars everywhere, and murky water to deal with. And it was very important, I think, that Cam and I had taken a lot of time ahead of the trip, making sure our boats were well prepared for the trip and preparing a big repair kit to take on the river, which we used several times. And you can see, you can sort of see why we got stuck, and the conditions were not at all what we expected. It was a very difficult river. And Cam.
Well, I just want to interject. I was thinking about it earlier today. It was a great idea. Don suggested we put all the boats together at home before we go out. And I haven't always done that with my alley pack. Usually I take it out of the bag, I straighten out some of the bent aluminum pieces, but I don't take the time to actually assemble the boat. But it occurred to me earlier today, as both the boats and ourselves get older, it's probably more and more important to do that, because the boats are going to need more attention and we need more reminders of what needs to be done. There was a period where I would put a note in the boat, in the bag after a trip, saying what I needed to do before the next trip. But I think this was way better, just to put the boat together and make sure it's going to work and do the repairs right then. So it was time well spent. I recommend it to anyone who's doing trips with these collapsible boats. Okay, so yeah, I was going to speak briefly to the navigational challenge. And so I'm just going to take a couple minutes. And those of you who have done trips with shallow, braided, turbid rivers know all this already. But for what it's worth, I have just a couple basic guidelines that I keep in mind when I'm choosing the route, which I like to be in the lead choosing the route. I enjoy it. It's fun. And the simple rule is, when the river's turning, you stay to the outside of the turn, just because the water tends to be deeper on the outsides of turns. I mean, I think we all know that if we've canoed at all. And most of the time that gets you through. If you stay on the outside, usually that's where the deep channel is. I apologize, my little legend is sideways there, but there's a cool word. Talveg is the word, and it's of Germanic origins, and it means the deep river channel. So I learned that word a couple of years ago, and it's always stuck with me. So you want to follow the Talveg on a shallow river to minimize the amount of time you have to drag your boat, especially with an alley pack where you don't want to get holes in the bottom. So, 80% of the time you're great on the outside, but there are situations that, and Phil points out there's sweepers. That's why, like on the Upper Chena, you stay to the inside on blind corners, because the sweepers are on the outside, because that's where the deep water is and it undercuts the bank. Here, this wasn't a river we had to worry about sweepers. We're worried about getting grounded out in the shallow gravels. But sometimes, as many of you have experienced, the outside channel will run out of water and you'll end up perched on the gravel at the bottom of the outside channel. So what I do as my principle number 2 is, as I'm going down the outside, I'm looking at the channels that take off towards the inside, and I look to see which ones drop the fastest. So you compare the horizon lines of the different channels, and if one of the ones that's cutting off towards the inside has a lower horizon line than the one you're following on the outside, that means the other channels are going to be contributing to it rapidly. So, now and then you think, oh man, this outside one is losing water. I'm going to bail, try to scooch down one of the insides, whichever one has the lowest horizon line. and then the other ones will feed into it and you'll pick up the water faster. So anyways, just two things to keep in mind. And I find with those two guidelines, most of the time you're doing the best you can. Obviously, there's situations where no matter what you do, you're going to end up getting out of the boat, right? It doesn't always work, but it minimizes those if you keep those two things in mind. That's it.
So before the trip, Kim contacted me and told me she and her friend were working together to create a new piece of Arctic gear that was on our trip. It was eventually dubbed the Arctic Burqa. And Kim and she brought me one too. And this was a repurposed tent. And they were quite nice. You could get inside them and drink your coffee in the morning or eat your dinner in there. It has pockets, so you could use them. They might have bathroom applications too. I didn't use mine that way, but it could happen. And so it's an interesting thing to do with those old tents that you probably have them. I know we do, but I already have my Arctic Burqa, so I'm set.
Okay.
Wayne.
Okay, so one of the sites where the blue beads were found and which Don and Tracy were aware of is a site called Etivlik. It's a big village on River Right as you're going down river. And it is there's only one way to describe it. It's just absolutely magnificent. It is a big winter village site where the Inupiat people had built a number of these drive fences, caribou drive fences. They're called the nuksuks, these rock features. And basically the idea of them was that they would go out on the landscape, find large rocks, create lines of them, stand them up to create the image of as if they're lines of people. And they would line them up along ridge crests and such where they're highly visible. And they would basically reach out across the landscape and create a funnel to intercept migrating caribou. They would hit the caribou would hit the outer edge of these things. Could you go back, please? You intersperse a little bit to get the caribou flowing into the funnel, and then you funnel them toward a lake. Next slide. And in this case, it is a lake where the people had built a large village. The village of Etivlik had 28 houses and 41 meat storage pits. You can see the lake in the background. And so they would funnel the caribou into the lake and then hunt them in the water from kayaks, and then tow the dead animals to shore, process them, store them in their storage pits. And then on a little hilltop right above the village site, they built this, they call them a Kosig or Kozik, a men's house that was kind of the central gathering area, not just for the men to get together and work on things and share stories, but also it was a big dance hall for all the community. And you can see from the landscape that there are no big rocks to be had anywhere. So the people that built this thing had to go off on the landscape, who knows where, get these rocks, haul them in, and then build the foundation of this hut, which would have then been a kind of a bent willow framework with caribou hides draped over the top of it. And just really a stunning site that has a real sense of place, given the nuksuks, the drive fences, the house pits, the lake, and this central communal house. Next slide.
I think that's Cam.
While we were there, Cam went off on his own and had an experience.
Well, yeah, and it's, I mean, the good thing about it, we could see each other the whole time. It's such wide open country, but I did wander off by myself, and I noticed the bull caribou just over a brow, and I was able to get very close to both of these. And I was oblivious at the time that, and I was thinking, oh, this is cool. We're seeing caribou in an area where the natives, for millennia harvested their caribou. But then only later did I realize a whole bunch of them were pouring over the ridge on the far side of the river. And it's hard to make them out in this picture, but eventually we all saw them. And as we were walking back to the river to our boats, we just saw hundreds of caribou coming over that, well, the low ridge on the far side, you know, towards us, as if they were going to go on the same route that the natives, you know, channeled them into the lake on. So that was definitely one of the highlights of the trip. It wasn't like tens of thousands, but, you know, but there were definitely hundreds of them coming over the ridge.
A very remarkable moment.
So we've already mentioned that the nicest weather was the first couple of days. And then we didn't get rained on all the time, or really, in my mind, a lot. But it was raining around us all the time. And there was one other significant weather factor. And we'll see if this works at all. Yeah, that was significant. That the wind had a major impact on our trip. And of course, you know, it could rain. It could still be really windy. Or, you know, maybe that wind is blowing that little bit of blue sky towards us.
Here it is.
There was always a little bit of blue sky around. This was the biggest this was the biggest wind that we experienced, or we were in the wrong, you know, in a place where it was dramatic, but it impacted us a lot. And we pretty much, this may be the only time that finding willows for the kitchen was the major driver in camping on a river trip for us. But it was after a point, every evening the wind came up, and we were grateful to have the tarp and the bug tent shelter also as places for the group to gather. And we often ended up pitching our tents in a line so that we'd have a lee for people in the tents that weren't on the front. And headwinds on the water were an issue. The water was coming up, but that was kind of nice because we could paddle more and walk less. But the other element of the weather that was just astonishing were the light and cloud shows that were on the skies, in vast skies. They were painted across them every day, all around us, and it was constantly changing. And it was just one of the most beautiful sights to behold. It really was amazing.
So Tracy, before we leave the topic of the wind, most of the time it was a tailwind. It was pushing us downriver. Occasionally, you know, obviously the river's twisting and turning, and occasionally we'd be fighting headwinds. But there were a couple days where literally you could rudder the canoe and get pushed downriver by the wind. So we were super lucky it wasn't blowing upriver all that time, or it would have been a much harder trip.
I will say that we were getting tired.
Yeah, we got tired for sure.
We came to Nigu Bluff. You can see the water was quite high when we got here. We'd seen a lot of rain, but this bluff is just astonishing in its multicolored rocks. You know, just an amazing bluff that you can't miss. It's really, the river runs right under it, and it's a beautiful outcropping. We did not hike there. The river was high, and we did not have a real good access to get in there, and we were a little behind schedule, so we pushed on past night.
And the wind was howling, as I recall. I think it was pretty windy that.
Yep. Eventually, we got to the confluence of the Nigu and Etivlik.
I think this is a good point to mention that Richard was our other subject matter expert. Well, Cam was our route finding expert, and Richard is a photographer, and you can tell which pictures he took in our slideshow. At least I think you can.
just past the confluence with the Etivlik is one of the main reasons that we came back. On our 2015 trip, we saw a ridge that came almost down to the water with a lot of tors sticking up. We sort of nicknamed that Stegosaurus Ridge, and we were really keen on hiking there. So we camped very close to that and took a long hike up to the ridge, and that was on July 28th, obviously. And Tracie and I were like bringing up the rear. Dave was in front, but we got up to this ridge, and just magnificent views in a really remarkable place. The wind was blowing, and you can see if you can, our tents are visible down on the gravel bar way in the way upriver from where we are there.
And this is where, right here is where we stopped and watched the peregrine falcon. It may actually be that one of those dark dots in the gap, a peregrine falcon soaring in and out of this gap, playing with the wind. And it did it repeatedly. It would just loop around and around and around.
Okay, Dave.
Well, it was here bear encounter, and I'm going to tell you what I really want to tell you is follow all those rules you've heard for bear encounters. Make yourself big, make yourself known, get upwind, stand your ground, talk to the bear. So, another rule that I did not follow was stay with the group. So I went off on my own. We up on Stegosaurus Ridge. Everybody stayed back for a little bit of lunch. And I decided, well, I'll just walk up the ridge a little bit more for a look around. And I crossed over the other side of the ridge and I decided to look up because it was an obvious place where caribou had passed and could be passing again. As I looked up, I saw about 100 yards off, at sort of the same level, a sow and a cub. And they were coming right towards me. They were slowly walking along. And I tried to get their attention. It was really windy. So I thought they saw me. And I said, okay, well, that's it. Because all the other bear encounters I've had, they just run off. Well, this one didn't. They just kept coming towards me. And it began, I thought, well, this is really strange. I better move upwind. And so I moved out of the path between them and me. So I moved downhill, which was upwind. And she came on that same line, got even with me. I'd had my bear spray out by then, got even with me. And she was maybe at that point, 100 yards, maybe less, 20 yards off. She stood up. I thought she heard me because I was talking to her, but maybe she didn't because of the wind. She came charging right at me, stood up, got down on all fours, and just came barreling towards me. And as she got close, I found maybe when she was about 15 feet away, the wind was going right in her face. And I let go with the bear spray, and she kept charging. She probably came within 10 feet of me before she stopped. And she stopped, and, I can't really remember what happened. But she turned around and went back up to the cub again and came right down at me again on my left. And I sprayed again as she got close, 10 feet or so, maybe 15 feet when I started spraying. And I think that time she got a whiff of it. And because she sniffed in the air as she stopped and slowly moved back up towards the cub and was chomping and drool coming down. And all of a sudden she just took off back up towards the cub, up and over the hill. So I was that nervous because I kept going over my mind, okay, what do I do now? What do I do now? Make yourself look big. So I threw my hands up in the air, kept talking. And then really the main thing is stand your ground. So waited and waited and waited. Don't spray too early. I finally sprayed. She went back up and unfortunately came again. So the good thing is nobody died. I didn't die. The cub didn't die. The sow didn't. They went back over the ridge. But the bad thing is, we talked about this afterwards. I shouldn't have gone off by my own. I mean, it's one thing if I get hurt. I mean, that would be the worst case scenario. If I died, that's the next worst case. I mean, it's better if I die than be injured out there and have to get me back home. But nobody would have known where to really look for me. I kind of went up the ridge. I mean, people were going in that direction eventually, and I warned them off. But we shouldn't have become separated. If you're out by yourself on a solo trip, that's way different. You're not going to hold up the whole rest of the party because of your mistake. But that could have happened in this. So, follow all those rules they've told you. Don't run, stand your ground, talk to them, and wait until they get close to let go of the bear spray. So, end of stories is follow those rules, and everybody's happy, hopefully.
We're
Worked out.
happy when he got back, and we heard the story.
Yeah. And of course, nobody saw it, so I could totally be lying. So
We did see Dave afterwards. I don't think he was lying. Well, we're glad you're okay, David, and it was good for all of us because I think we all were wandering around a little.
Yeah.
Back to
So-
Wayne.
So, well, another person who went off roaming by themselves that day on Stegosaurus Ridge was Richard Murphy. And most of us stayed kind of in the center of the Stegosaurus back. But Richard went off roaming down below us on an isolated outcrop. And when we all gathered back together, he said that he had discovered what looked like a wolf's den. And he noted a number of weird bones pounded into the cracks above the wolf den that he couldn't explain. And so we all decided that the thing to do was to go down and check out Richard's wolf den. And so we did. And so the image on the left is a picture of the den. Basically, it was a crack where this is a limestone ridge, and it was a big block of the ridge that had separated off from the main body of it. And then there was a cave back up inside it. And the wolves had been using it for so long that they had built a midden. You can see kind of a brownish layer of dirt coming out of the cave. And that is basically organic material loaded with primarily bones, a lot of ground squirrel bones, caribou bone, some bird bone, small birds. And so and also wolf scats. And so you can see on the right, that's Dave Musgrave and Don Pendergrast looking into the wolf den to give a sense of scale. Next slide. And then when we looked up above, we saw that there were a total of 7 either big pieces of bone, antler, or wood that had been pounded into a crack right above the entry to the wolf den. And you can see on these 2 bones, the one on the right, you can see where it's been notched, and the notch would have been made as a hole basically for tying rope around. The one on the left actually still has the twine in place. That orange that you see hanging down from it is basically lichen that's grown onto the twine. And we interpret that as being a place where the Inupiat people, the mountain Inupiat, were snaring wolves for their hides. And these are snare anchors that they would have tied snares to, draped them down into the entry, and they would have snared wolves there. And one of the things, the moral of the story, we did 2 things. We did a very careful recording of the site. We took photographs, some measurements, did a description. And when we got back, I filed a report with the Bureau of Land Management. They were unaware of the site. So now they're aware of it. They've put it in their site database. And whenever they get an archaeologist out there, they'll go check up on it and monitor it, basically to make sure that it stays as is. The other part of the story is that when you find sites like this out on the landscape, the ethic is that you just basically leave them as is. Do not remove anything, don't touch anything. Enjoy it as you find it and leave it for others to find and discover. So a really cool site, just knocked our socks off. And it continues to knock socks.
This is the hike back. Dave, I just wanted to give you a chance. Do you have anything to add to previous topics? Because you weren't able to practice with us. So any thoughts before we move on?
Just that I hope all the people that were on this trip can come out and cook for me on my next trip.
It was a great group of people to be in bad weather with. So we finally have enough water to really be able to paddle. We've done our fabulous hike. Dave has survived the bear attack, and Don and I are starting to have little side discussions about water levels and what this might mean on the Colville. Because even though it hasn't always been raining on us, it's been raining around us all the time. And we've been out for 2 weeks. And so we eventually brought our concerns to the group. We were concerned that we would reach the Colville and it would be flooding. And we had this complex, charter coming in to resupply, 2 more people coming in, Cam going out, and so we all agreed that there was cause for concern and we needed to start doing some investigation. So we made calls to Coyote Air to see, did they know what the weather was doing and in general what would be doing. And they said that there had been a high water event on the western Colville, that it was heading east, and which is where we were, and that they had not flown in 5 days and were way behind and backed up on their flights. And we let's see, we called Wrights to see, that was our big expense, was that Wrights charter. What's going to happen if we cancel this charter? And we called John Shower, and he was somewhere on a beach. We asked him to do a little research for us on water levels. And it just, lots of discussion. We called Mike and Margaret to let them know we were wondering what was going to happen, and we'd let them know as soon as we made a decision. But it was clear that we couldn't just sort of hope for the best. We either needed to decide to go for it, or we needed to call the trip and say it's not safe. And we couldn't wait till we got to the Colville to do that. It wouldn't be fair to Mike and Margaret or to the air taxi operators. So after much agonizing, we made the call that we were not going to float the Colville. So I can't say enough good things about Coyote Air, who worked with us to make a plan to get us out. I can't say enough good things about Ride Air Service and Christina, who, because it was a weather call, they just refunded us 100% of our $6,000+ that we had paid them. And I can't say enough good things about Mike and Margaret, who, when we told them, sorry, you're not floating the Colville and neither are we, they offered to come to Coldfoot and pick us up. And so if you don't know Mike Schmoker and Margaret Mannix, and you get a chance to, I'd say befriend them, because they're great friends to have. And so we still had ways to go on our trip, but at this point we've already acknowledged we're not going to get to go be out for a month. So we carried on.
All right, so we got to the takeout, what would become our takeout spot, which is a gravel bar just below the confluence of the Etivlik with the Colville, and we had a celebration because it was Tracie's and my anniversary and Cam's birthday, so yippee! We enjoyed each other's company. And then that night, we slept that night. The water came up. We had to move the kitchen out of the water. The river was coming up. There's no doubt about it. So
We had to wait around a day.
we had to wait a day before Coyote Air could come and get us, which they did. And the day of the takeout was a lot of ground fog. We were wondering, are we ever going to get out of here? But eventually we did. So I just want to recapitulate some of the things that we relearned, the lessons that we relearned on this trip. We are all experienced outdoors people, but we certainly learned that the river character changes dramatically from year to year, from water level to water level. And that the other thing is that climate change is going to significantly alter Arctic travel. If you're planning to revisit a place, it's really going to be changed when you get there for the second time. Climate change is most notably happening in the Arctic, and the rivers are changing, the permafrost is melting, the ground is eroding away. It's a very different scene. The third thing that we learned is that having subject matter experts along it's a wonderful addition to the trip. I cannot tell you how much Wayne and his archaeological knowledge of that place and the papers that he brought along and our nightly archaeological little lecture, was just made that trip extraordinary, I think, for all of us. And Richard Murphy's photographs, you'll see a few wonderful photographs at the end, are just great mementos of the trip. We have learned from Dave, you should never be hiking alone. At least let people know where you're going if you do decide to hike along, where you're going, when you'll be back. 4 people that are hiking together offer a very, very high degree of bear protection. So, hike with people that are on the trip with you, stay together, and always carry your bear spray. Even if you're going, out to pee behind the willows, take your bear spray with you. You should always have bear spray. Another thing is that the electronic devices, I'm a map and compass kind of guy, but boy, both Dave and Kim had
Gaia.
Had a Gaia program on their smartphones. We had, solar cells to charge batteries with. Dave's inReach could get weather reports. So all of that information, and of course sat phones that we made telephone calls with, all of that really added a high degree of safety, I believe, and gave us a lot more knowledge so that we could make intelligent decisions about about what we're doing. So even a Luddite like me can see the great value in electronic devices. They can really help. Anytime you're traveling in the Arctic, you need to be, or on any big trip, you need to be flexible. You know, you need to be able to change your plans, not be fixed on, well, this is the way we planned it, and that's the way it's going to do, way it's going to be. You know, be flexible. You're likely to have to change your plans. You should be able to do it. When you do change your plans, you need to make firm decisions, and you need to assess the whole situation, gather a lot of information, talk to all the participants in the group, canvass everybody, make your decision, and stick to that decision. I think it's very important that we match skills, experience, and knowledge of the participants to that particular trip. I mean, it's always nice to have subject matter experts. It's nice to have people that have good outdoor experience. It's wonderful to have, you know, a medical person along. You know, you really want to try to choose the participants in the group so that you'll have a well-rounded, well-versed group of people to make a trip like this with. And I guess the last thing I want to say is a group tarp and a bug tent makes for a better trip. All of our gear needs to be able to stand up to big winds. Our boats need to be able to stand up to sort of unexpected. You need to be prepared to repair your boat should you need to. So, taking good gear, knowing how to use it correctly, and be able to repair it if necessary, are all of those are very important things. So eventually, we Coyote Year came, and there we are. Richard Murphy, Don Pendergrast, Dave Musgrave, Tracie Pendergrast, Cam Leonard, Wayne Howell, Kim Nay, and 43G, Coyote Ayers Beaver. We're fixing to head back to Coldfoot. And of course, you know, the day that we chose to leave was like sunshine and blue skies.
And was it the right decision?
It was absolutely the right decision to make. And that's because although it was a wonderful, wonderful weather flowing out, and we had good weather when we overnighted in Coldfoot and driving back to Fairbanks, as predicted, the second storm cell came through, the rivers rose, the temperature dropped 10 degrees in the daytime and 10 degrees at night. So we were talking mid 30s, mid 40s, and windy and rainy and flooding rivers. So it was good that we left when we did. And everybody's smiling. Look at that. Well, we got back to Coldfoot. Mike and Margaret, they drove their car. They drove my car, our car, pulled our canoe trailer up. We packed up everything, crammed everybody into the vehicles, drove back to Fairbanks. And that was the end of our Nigu, Etivlik, very short bit of the Colville River. But it was, you know, it was a memorable trip and a memorable group. And that's the end of the trip. And I wonder if any of the presenters have anything to add to that, or if any people have questions or comments they would like to ask or make.
Yeah, Don, there's a couple of questions in the chat. We
Okay.
might as well get to. So do you remember what kind of boats those campers from Lake Wichiwama, whatever it is? What kind of
Those
boat-
were also alley packs.
Were they? Okay, I couldn't remember.
I'm pretty
Those-
sure. Pretty sure they were alley packs. It's possible they were pack boats, but I think they were alley packs.
They were brand new. I remember that.
Yeah, they were
beautiful-
brand new.
Beautiful boats, unlike the boats we had. But then another question was when the picture of you in the shop working on the boat, she was wondering why you had that mask on.
I was putting keel strips on the bottom in the wear spots, and using nasty glue to put that on with, and I normally enjoy that, but it was that's pretty nasty stuff to glue the keel strips on with. So
Yeah.
it's really better to wear a mask and do it in the open air and that sort of thing. Any other questions or comments?
I think Gail just had a question about footwear. See if I can find the chat. Here it is. Somebody asked, what class water is the Colville at flood, just flat and fast? And that's the impression we have, that but camping would have been difficult, if not hard to find, which Jack Mosby's presentation showed. And I don't know, when it can be fast and flat and full of chunks of tundra, and
It won't be trees.
yeah, I don't know.
But if you saw Jack's presentation, I think that's now 2 weeks ago. Boy, they were in a place they had to move camp up 3 times, and then they had to go downriver at flood stage, and it's never a good idea to be paddling at flood stage.
So Wayne, do you know how the diameter of the men's structure, roughly?
I would put it at about, probably at about 15 feet.
Yeah, that's what I would say. 15, maybe 20 feet outside.
Yeah,
I
not
think
very
most-
big. Yeah,
Yeah.
not all that big.
There's a question about what kind of footwear did we have on the river? I was wearing insulated extra toughs.
Yeah, I think I don't know whether I was wearing my insulated extra toughs or maybe muck boots of some kind, but waterproof, sort of knee-high boots is pretty much what everybody wore.
Well, that's not strictly true. I wear those gator things from Portage with
that's
oversized running shoes. I have the extra toughs too, but I don't know. Anyways, these gaiters you can get that come all the way up to your knee, and it's just more comfortable, and then oversized running shoes over them. So
Yeah.
another way to go.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that another lesson learned is as we went down from Stegosaurus Ridge, like a lot of people, we got separated by going down different large grades of the river, and everyone was not to do that. But it became a little bit concerning when you couldn't see your party. You didn't know if they were upriver from you or downriver, so you didn't know if you wanted to wait for them or if you wanted to hurry downriver. So just pack that away in the back of your mind. Don't lose. Try to go down the same braid.
Somebody asked what dates we were on the river. We put in roughly on July 18th and flew out on the 4th, I think.
4th of August, maybe.
Yeah,
3rd or
of
4th of
August.
August, yeah.
Let's see. Phil asked if the beads could have come the other way, since we know the Vikings were in Greenland up through at least the 1300s and likely trading for ivory.
That may, I'd have to think about that, but the dates wouldn't match up because they came to Alaska. Well, actually, the beads were not being manufactured in the 1300s. They didn't start manufacture until the 1400s. So,
Okay,
yeah.
that's, I'd seen an article in the UAF newsletter, and I was under the impression that the beads were actually manufactured starting in the 1100s. And I could be
No.
mistaken, though. It's,
Yeah, it's actually in the next issue of American Antiquity, there was a rebuttal to this article. And it was from a guy who has studied the manufacturing process at length. And he argued that these beads likely came in the 1500s, not the 1400s, because of the manufacturing technique.
okay,
But still making them pre-contact. You know, it's still
Correct, yeah.
remarkable. You know.
oh, yes, absolutely. I was just curious because, the Viking Greenland mysteries has always been fascinating to me. Part of that was the fact that there's no evidence that they hunted or ate sea mammals, including walrus, and yet I saw an article in BBC a couple years ago that showed spectroscopic analysis of medieval ivory in Europe, medieval artifacts from Europe, showed that the vast majority of it, up to 80%, was from Greenland walrus. So obviously there was some trade going on there.
So if you'd like to drop your email in the chat box, I'll send you the articles.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you.
So someone's asking about how we handled human waste, and we used cat holes. We did not carry out our human waste. And Phil also had a clarification about the otters. He says 466 otters were built, and there are still 50 flying in Alaska.
50 flying in Alaska.
Alaska
Okay.
still.
Well, the 50 is what stuck in my mind.
And
They
he
built a lot more beavers than they did otters.
Any other questions?
Yeah, this is Randy Pitney. We can't get on the chat box on this, but did you, and very well organized trip, did you have the double bottom alley packs though? The
No,
whitewater with the double bottom?
no,
Okay.
no. All of our alley packs are almost as old as I am.
No, I had one that was, I think, older than that, but it had a double bottom whitewater version.
Huh.
Got it from Ron Davis. So he used to sponsor us in races.
Yeah.
And eventually bought it from him, but they're pretty tough on the bottom for those rocks.
It was, boy, especially when the wind, even when the wind was coming from the back, when there was wind, murky water, it was super hard to tell sometimes where was water and where was rocks and riffles. It was a good exercise for all of us to practice our river reading skills.
So I wanted to, this is June, I just wanted to add to the trying to stay on the same braid. I was on a trip with Shirley, help me with her name. Anyway, the geologist. And I was, pardon?
Shirley Liss.
Yes, thank you. And I was paddling somebody, I had traded inflatable kayaks, and I was waiting to see which braid we were going to go down, but there was also wind, and I thought we were going to take one, and so I was kind of more that way, and the group ended up going the other way, and I couldn't get up there. And so, and then while I was turning around, I floated by the bottom of this little tiny island. So, and then the next juncture was way downstream, and I got separated from everybody for a couple of hours, and it was pretty scary for all of us. Shirley fired her gun to try and signal me. I never heard it. And trying to figure out when the braids came back together. I finally did stop and they finally caught up to me. But it was pretty scary for all of us. So yeah, just another experience.
Yep.
Don't do
Yeah.
that.
I think we all of us were experienced enough to know what to do. We just didn't do the right thing all the time. So it's like, that's why it was lessons relearned.
Yeah.
So I did the Nigu, Etivlik, Colville in 2011. And
Uh-huh.
we went all the way to Nuiqsut and took out.
Uh-huh.
But one thing we took that was a teepee, and that's kind of what I've gone to for Arctic kind of trips.
Uh-huh.
Is an appropriately sized teepee that gives you better wind protection than a tarp.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we never got out of our boats to speak of. We didn't. It was like you say, it's a totally different river.
Uh-huh.
We jumped on the Nigu and paddled every day, all day, and we were out there a month and got all the way to Nuiqsut. So
Uh-huh.
without any difficulty. So totally different river.
Yeah.
Do you know where you put in, Stan?
We were upstream from you, I think.
Uh-huh.
There was a place where coyote lands, and it's such an obscure spot that several people had pack rafted over there. They started at Anaktuvik Pass and got up one river, down another river.
Uh-huh.
So they'd gotten over there using pack rafts, and they could not find the landing strip. They had the exact coordinates, and they were wandering around the bushes and saying, "No way they can land here." Nope,
Uh-huh.
they landed there.
Uh-huh. Well, it's always good to fly with Dirk. He's a
Dirk, he's
pilot.
amazing.
That's for sure. The young men from Camp Widgiewagon did that same. They paddled. I think they were out 35 days and they paddled all the way to Nuiqsut. That's
And before that, they were hiking.
Yeah, they were hiking before that. So
Wow.
it's quite a trip that particular camp puts together.
Hmm.
Eric, those of you who know Eric Buteau, he went to that camp as a kid, as did his father before him, and his two sons have gone to that camp. So we mentioned the Buteaus. Everybody sort of goes, "Oh yeah, we know the Buteaus."
Well, that's all we have officially. We're happy to stay and chat,
Yeah.
but
Just remember that on April 30th is the night of the Delta Clearwater overnight. You must contact me to sign up because we're limiting the number of people who can be on that trip. The next day, May the 1st, will be the day trip. I think you should probably contact Alan Batten on that. He will be the trip leader. The boat swap at Beaver Sports is going to be May the 7th, 9 o'clock drop off, and the sail will start at 11. I'm not exactly sure when it's going to end, but you'll find that out when you drop your equipment off. And our next in-person sort of lecture, like we had, well, that was a week ago, maybe, is going to be also at Beaver Sports, May the 12th. It will be about trip packing, and we're going to have a kayak, pack raft, canoes, raft, etc., and see what kind of gear people take in each particular kind of craft, and some tips for how to pack well and people's favorite kinds of gear. So Beaver Sports, May the 12th, trip packing. Check our website.
Excuse me.
All right. I will say,
maybe John, did you
Yeah.
have something you wanted to add?
I was before I started to sneeze.
okay.
Excuse me. But just a reminder that
we've got a membership survey that we're going to close out here pretty soon. It's a good time to take a look at the website, scroll down past the last couple of presentations, and there's just a link to a quick, probably take you 10 minutes to go through. Excuse me. A lot of the input has been used to plan some of these trip planning sessions that last week's and the one that's upcoming. And also to get some ideas about some things we might do with mentoring opportunities this early this summer. And the other thing is, I know Al sent out a reminder that memberships typically go, they start from April 1 through March 31. If you joined after October, there's you're still good for through next through March 31, 2023. But if you haven't re-upped in a while, fairbankspaddlers.org/join is an online membership where you can download a PDF if you really want to mail it in, and it's only $10 individual, $15 for a household, $100 lifetime. Just a little reminder. We appreciate support.
Okay. Thank you, John. Hello, Karen. All right. I will say good night. Thank you, fellow
Thank you.
presenters, and thank you all for coming and listening. And